This short video is going to help you understand some of the drugs that we use in advanced cardiac life support to help prepare you for the skills lab and simulation. This is being presented by Dr. Emily Nobles. To start, we're going to cover some general principles of med administration related to ACLS. So there are 3 different routes of administration. We can give medications intravenously, we can give them intraosseously, which is straight into the bone marrow. That's going to be our preferred route, giving either IV or IO. And then our other option is to give something endotracheally, or via an endotracheal tube. This can be considered if we don't have any other options for access, but it's typically less effective. We have poor absorption in the lungs, and our optimal drug dosing can kind of vary. A typical rule of thumb is that we'll dose 2 to 2.5 times the IV dose and dilute the medication in 5 to 10 milliliters of sterile water or sterile saline. We also want to consider what access the patient currently has, and is that access patent? So if our patient only has a 22 gauge peripheral IV in the thumb, are we going to need more access in this situation? If the patient's experiencing a medical emergency, most likely. We're going to be probably rapidly infusing fluids, pushing drugs, and starting drips. So generally we like to have as much access as we can within reason. Peripheral IVs are the easiest to obtain during a code situation. However, sometimes patients will have central lines inserted during a code. It's not ideal to put in a central line, so if we can easily put in a peripheral IV or an IO line, that's what we'll go with, because the central line insertion could cause interruptions in CPR and potential complications due to the movement of patients while we're doing compressions. However, if a patient already has a central line already that's patent, that's going to be our preferred route. When we're administering meds, we want to employ a rapid IV push technique for most of the medications, unless it's otherwise specified or contraindicated. And then typically we want to flush rapid, normal saline flush of about 20 mLs afterwards to make sure that that enters central circulation. Something else that's important to note is that we want to make sure that we're using closed-loop communication. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the skills lab, but closed-loop communication is where you confirm communication that's been given to you by the team leader regarding med administration by repeating it back and verifying it, and then you also confirm when you've administered the medication, so that way the recorder can make sure that it's accurately documented. And then you must have a good knowledge of the ACLS drugs to function properly as a member of the resuscitation team. There are 4 main ACLS algorithms to consider when responding to a medical emergency or a patient code, and these are adult bradycardia with a pulse, adult tachycardia with a pulse, we have cardiac arrest with pulseless VTAC or VFib, cardiac arrest with asystole and PEA. With any of the algorithms, we want to ensure that we have a good patent airway, or we assist breathing if the patient's not breathing effectively, that we monitor the patient's vital signs and cardiac rhythm, and that we establish good IV access early on. The reason I bring up the algorithms for you is that we're going to be learning the drugs by grouping them together by algorithm. This is a good way to help memorize them, because if you know what's going on with the patient and what you need to correct, you can have a good idea of what effect that drug may have. First, we're going to talk about adult bradycardia with a pulse. So typically when you have a patient in a bradycardic rhythm, if they're not symptomatic or in any kind of distress, typically we'll monitor and observe. They're likely going to be admitted and worked up, but they don't necessarily need urgent ACLS intervention. However, if the patient is symptomatic, the first line drug that we're going to do is atropine. We give atropine 1 milligram at a time, and we can give it every 3 to 5 minutes, up to a 3 milligram max. Atropine is a muscarinic antagonist, and it reverses cholinergic mediated decreases in heart rate and AV node conduction. Ideally, what it does is it's going to increase that patient's heart rate. We do have to be cautious with patients who have an MI or suspected coronary ischemia, and the reason for that is because that increase in heart rate that atropine is going to give us is also going to increase the workload on the heart, which could potentially increase that area of infarct or the area of ischemia. If atropine's not effective, our next step is actually going to be to select a second-line treatment. While transcutaneous pacing is not a pharmacological option on here, typically it's kind of our next line of thought. If we are going to be transcutaneously pacing the patient, We want to make sure that we give the patient a sedative or an analgesic before, if possible, because it can be very uncomfortable to transmit those electrical signals to the heart through the skin. The other two options that we have are dopamine or epinephrine. Both of these are beta-adrenergic agonists, so they're vasoconstrictors and positive chronotropes, meaning that they constrict the blood vessels, increasing our blood pressure, and they also increase heart rate. While dopamine is a weight-based strip, epinephrine is not, and they can both be titrated up depending on the patient's response. Some patients with bradycardia can be experiencing it as a result of a beta blocker or a calcium channel blocker overdose, and when the drug is out of their system, that bradycardia will resolve. There are other patients with bradycardia that may need treatment for the underlying cause, so they may end up having a transvenous pacemaker, a permanent pacemaker, or a cardiology consult. For adult tachycardia with a pulse, we again need to determine is the patient symptomatic or not. If they're not symptomatic, we tend to have a little bit of time to try some non-pharmacologic measures. With tachycardia, we have to look at the patient's rhythm to determine our course of action based on whether the QRS complex is wide or narrow. A wide QRS complex is going to be greater than 0.12 seconds. So if our patient's not symptomatic and the QRS is narrow and the rhythm is regular, sometimes you may see vagal maneuvers tried. Our first-line drug for adult tachycardia is going to be adenosine, which is typically given for the patient in SVT, which is a regular, narrow QRS complex tachycardia. You can give adenosine for a wide complex rhythm, but it's not always as effective and can only be given if that rhythm is regular and monomorphic. Adenosine is a very rapid-acting drug with a short half-life, and the way that it works is it decreases automaticity and it slows conduction in the heart. We do want to monitor the patient after adenosine administration because it can cause bradycardia and hypotension. The administration of adenosine starts with a 6 milligram dose for the first dose, which is a rapid IV push followed by rapid flush. And then if the patient does not have a response, we will try a 12 milligram dose push administered in the same way. This does require some patient education because when we give adenosine, the patient will literally flatline for a period of time before that normal heart rhythm resumes. So it's something that you want to educate the patient about so they can be aware, and you want to make sure that you have a code card close by. The other non-pharmacologic measure that we can do if adenosine doesn't work is a synchronized cardioversion, where we deliver an electrical shock to the heart in the hopes of restoring a normal rhythm. Just like before, when we were talking about pacing, we want to give some sedation and analgesia if absolutely possible for the patient. If adenosine or a cardioversion are unsuccessful, then we want to move to an antiarrhythmic drug. So our antiarrhythmic options are procainamide, amiodarone, and sotalol. Most commonly used is amiodarone, which is mixed in D5W. We do need to be careful about patients that have a long QT interval. That kind of tells us about the time it takes for ventricular repolarization. And if we're giving antiarrhythmics in a patient with a long QT, it can put a patient at risk for ventricular arrhythmias. Amiodarone does have a higher risk of toxicity and some side effects, so it needs to be used cautiously, and we don't want to exceed the cumulative 24-hour dose of 2.2 grams in a 24-hour period. We're going to talk some more about amiodarone in just a bit. When we have a patient who's in cardiac arrest in either pulseless VTAC or VFib, we treat with the same kind of drugs. So our first course of action for this patient is CPR and early defibrillation, which has been shown to increase survival rate. Without good compressions and good CPR, the medications that we're giving aren't going to be able to circulate throughout the blood effectively. Our first line drug that we're going to give for this algorithm is epinephrine, and we give 1 milligram every 3 to 5 minutes. Epinephrine is a beta-adrenergic drug that vasoconstricts, so it increases heart rate and myocardial contractility, and it also increases cerebral and coronary blood flow. Our second line drugs are amiodarone and lidocaine. So the amiodarone dosing is different here. This is amiodarone boluses versus an amiodarone drip, like we've talked about before. And amiodarone, again, is an antiarrhythmic drug. It's very effective typically in patients who have pulseless VTAC or VFib. Lidocaine suppresses the automaticity of the conduction tissue in the heart, helping to slow down rapid ventricular dysrhythmias. It does need to be used cautiously in patients with hepatic impairment because it's metabolized in the liver. Some ACLS providers may choose to alternate between epinephrine and either amiodarone or lidocaine after each rhythm check or shock, because a rhythm check comes every 2 minutes, and because we can only give the epinephrine every 3 to 5 minutes, it's not quite time typically at that rhythm check to administer another dose of epinephrine. For our cardiac arrest rhythm, when the patient is in pulseless electrical activity or asystole, the only drug that we administer during this algorithm is going to be epinephrine. It's going to have the same dosing and frequency as before, so 1 milligram every 3 to 5 minutes. This is the only drug that we can give during this algorithm. However, other drugs can be given if we can identify possible reversible causes of arrest. So all of these drugs are great in the short term, but when a patient is arrested, we need to figure out why, what has happened. Figuring out why the patient arrested is going to improve the likelihood of success in our resuscitation attempts, and it's going to allow us to give some additional medications beyond those that are in the algorithm in an attempt to correct the underlying cause. So if we obtain ROS, which is return of spontaneous circulation, we might consider additional medications as well to treat the underlying cause. This slide shows you some of the reversible causes of cardiac and respiratory arrest that are affectionately known as the H's and T's. So that will include hypovolemia, hypoxia, hydrogen ion, meaning acidosis, hypo or hyperkalemia, hypothermia, tension pneumothorax, tamponade cardiac, toxins, and then thrombosis, either pulmonary or coronary. Personally, I have a hard time remembering the H's and T's in the way that they're laid out in that framework. So this is something that was shared by a colleague of mine that helps me remember them better. So all I remember is you have 3 H's, 2 hearts, 2 lungs, and then TAP. So your 3 H's are going to be hypoxia, hypovolemia, and hypothermia. Your 2 heart events are going to be either an MI or cardiac tamponade. Your 2 lung causes could be a PE or pneumothorax, and then TAP stands for toxins, acidosis, and potassium. Other drugs that may be given, especially when we start digging into potential causes of the arrest, the patient might need fluid resuscitation. So ideally we'd like to keep their mean arterial pressure greater than 65. So that might be achieved with vasopressors, it might be achieved with giving some IV fluids. Typically we might be giving some electrolytes depending on what the patient's lab values look like. Most commonly you'll see calcium, potassium, magnesium is given often, especially if the patient is in torsades, which is a VTAC-like rhythm. We also might give the patient sodium bicarbonate if they're acidotic. If the patient has an MI or a PE, we might be administering fibrinolytics, or we might be taking them to the cath lab or the vascular lab to be able to open up those vessels. And then Narcan, or naloxone, is an opioid receptor antagonist, and it is a reversal agent for opioid overdose. So it rapidly reverses the central nervous system and respiratory depression in patients that have had opioid overdose. So if we're concerned that the patient has overdosed and maybe that's why they've arrested, sometimes we'll give Narcan as well. This concludes the review of the ACLS drugs. Make sure that you complete the worksheet in the course and bring it to the skills lab.